later. Okay, so today we're talking about drawing windows. Yes. It's a topic I love. It is indeed very nerdy, but it's also really important for, when you're drawing outside, especially if, you don't have a lot of time, but you want to capture the sort of essence of a place, a building, can be a really important skill to think about and know how to approach. Um, Too many details can really take away from the overall sense of, windows sitting in a building. Scale and proportion obviously are important too. Sometimes if we spend too much time working on one thing, it gets blown out of proportion. So we'll just look at first how to sort of draw a single window and the different things to look for, maybe the anatomy of it a little bit. And then we'll look at how to place windows in a larger building. So we can just start with the single window. And I'm going to share my screen with you for some images. We actually worked with this image before of this window across from my window here in room, and I really think it's a great window to work from because it has, the window panes with really nice light and shadow, plus the shutters and a little bit of a cast shadow underneath. And actually, this is Marcia Perkins' drawing from a class we did before, and I thought it was a really beautiful example, so I just wanted to share it. This is a class where we didn't use lines, and we just explored using 3 values, the white of the paper and middle value and the dark to draw windows. So before we draw, I thought we could, I sort of made this little outline of the different parts of the window to think about how to even approach it or even break it down. It might seem obvious or it might not, so I thought we could talk about it a little bit. I mean, one thing is, the first thing to look at is the overall size and proportion. So these windows and the shutters, they're tall and narrow, right? Instead of more square, they're tall and narrow. And it just has this little frame. It's not even like really a cornice, I guess, around the window. And it just has a small sill. So one thing that's good to think about is drawing big shapes, then finding the smaller shapes inside of those big shapes. So this helps to not only speed up your drawing, but it also helps to get proportions right. So in this particular example, you could either draw this whole big square, like including the shutters first, and then break it down into these 1, 2, 3, 4 rectangles, right? And that's a pretty easy and straightforward way, excuse me, to do that. And one thing to think about is shutters, when they're open like this, they're not exactly straight, right? They tilt a little bit, usually down, right? Or it might be up, depending on your view. And this window is cool. It's like slightly open, which is cool because it gives us a little more depth. Now, this is a nice example because it has shadows. And so the shadows really tell us about how the window is set back into the wall, right? It's not here at the front level. It's sort of set back in. And the shadows tell us that, right? Because the light comes here, but then it's sort of set into the wall, which is why we have these deep shadows. So we're going to just spend a little bit of time drawing this. I'm going to mute everyone, and you can always unmute yourself. So we're going to spend a little bit of time drawing this window. Now, you can use shading if you want to, but you don't have to. The point is to look at the proportions and sort of the different parts of the window to have a, an in-depth understanding of the different parts, the shutters, the individual window panes, and you can see, where the window panes are set in a little bit from the building. So, any questions before we start drawing? Okay, so I'm not going to tell you like step by step how to draw this window, like as in a formula. We're just going to experiment and try it ourselves, and then afterwards share, any insights, comments, questions, sort of what you learned in trying to do it or in doing it successfully. Okay, so any questions before we start? Okay, great. So I'm going to share the image of a window, a single window, for those of you who if somebody just arrived. And what we'll do is we'll spend time drawing the different parts of the window. And while you're drawing, you're thinking about, you're sort of analyzing the different parts and how it's put together, which may not be something you've thought about before. So you can use shading or not. That's up to you. But we'll give it a try and just see what happens. So I'm going to set a timer for, let's say, 8 minutes. And if people need more time after that, you can just say that you need more time. Or if you feel like that's enough, then that's fine. So I'm just using a pencil, a kind of soft pencil, so I can do some shading if I want to. Okay, why don't we start?
Okay, just a little less than a minute left. Okay. So, do people need more time, or is this a good stopping point? Okay. Well, I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so I'd love to hear what happened, how it went. Was this fun? Was it tedious? Interesting? What did you learn from drawing the window?
I think it was easier than the last time we did it by blocking out the shapes in it. It's still, I spent more time on it, I think, than last time, but
Yes.
the proportions came out better for me.
Okay, so were you thinking about the big shape and then the smaller shapes within that?
I did it the way you did it on your demo there, with the large block outside it and then the shutters and panes, and it just seemed to come out in better proportion than the one I tried to do before.
Okay, great. Excellent.
This is Diane. I agree with Marcia. I found it easier to do it by starting out with a large shape and then realizing that the shutters had to be 1/4 each because they covered the windows, so it had to be proportional.
Right, so really they're pretty much the size of the windows, just outside. Okay, that's great. Yeah, making a rectangle and just breaking it into 4 more or less even rectangles can be a great way to start, right? You can always adjust it from there, but drawing each piece individually can be a little bit tedious, right? It's easier to use the whole shape first. Cool. Does anybody else want to share? Okay, I'll show you my drawing. This is as far as I got with my drawing here. And I just did the same. I broke it into 4 rectangles, basically, and then put some shading. All right. Okay.
This is Donna.
Hi, Donna.
I joined late, so I didn't hear your initial instructions.
Oh,
and
yeah, sorry. Okay.
My confusion, but my point is, I tried drawing on paper that's like this. What can I show myself?
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay, good. So I only see you, but I don't know what you see here. But so I'm drawing on paper, which is broken into squares. So I didn't get.
Oh, that helps. That's great.
But I wanted to put in all the details, not having heard your discussion.
Yeah.
Right. It was still fun. Yeah.
Yes, great. Your drawing looks wonderful. It's beautiful.
I got into the shading without knowing that was what you wanted.
Yeah, no, that's okay, right? The shading really gives it depth, right? And it tells us that the window is sitting back into the wall. Now that's really nice. Great. Yeah, and sounds like, right. So what we were saying is it's easier if you think about the big shape first and then just break it down into the shapes inside of that. You'll save yourself a lot of time. Cool. Thank you for sharing. Okay. Does anyone else want to share? Okay. Okay, so now let's talk about, so we've already sort of drawn this window once. We drew it in another way. So maybe you feel already comfortable with that, I hope. And we'll talk about instead putting windows in a whole building, right? Especially in Italy, you can have buildings with like 50 windows. And if you sit down to draw it, you think you're kidding, right? Like, how am I going to do this? This is going to take me days of my life of just drawing little windows. So I thought it could just give you an approach that is much quicker and could potentially save you pulling out some of your hair when you attempt to draw buildings with a lot of windows. Now, it's really helpful to put windows in because they give a sense of space, perspective, proportion. I've just used my photos. This is from the Piazza del Duomo in Orvieto. I've painted this scene many times. It's a favorite little square of mine. I also, is it here, I hope? I did a little diagram for you, which might hurt your eyes a little bit. It hurts mine for sure to look at it. But it has a point to it. So each color line sort of represents a step in a way to approach putting windows in a building. So this red line is, the first thing I do is get the overall shape of the building, right? And if you can think about it this way, it's really helpful. So this building here, right, is just a rectangle, right? It's longer than it is tall. This one's a little bit more square. And this one is more like a vertical rectangle. It's almost square, but not quite. Right, so what you want to look for, and sort of you can measure, right, to get the proportions, and as best as you can, get this first big box shape of the actual facade of the building. And then what I do is I would use these blue lines, and these blue lines are the tops and the bottoms of the windows, running, in this case, right, in perspective, right? I didn't put the top here. There's the eaves, the cornice, and then I forgot to put the top here as well. But on the top and the bottom, to sort of place where they are, right, in terms of height of the building, and then where do they go? You know, how much space is in between them, or how much space between, you know, the ground and what you can do is measure. Now, it doesn't have to be exact, right? Nobody, hopefully, is going to come to you and say, oh, you know what, like, there are 5 windows and not 3, or in that actual building. The point is to make it believable. You don't have to put in every window, okay? So what I do is I sort of find the tops and the bottoms. Right, and so you see how these are not even to these, and these are not even to these. So that's why it's helpful to first make this big box. You could even divide this into 2 if you want to. And then find the windows, which may be, you know, in perspective. Here we're pretty much head on, so they're straight lines. And then what you can do, and draw all this on your paper. Now, you can draw it with sort of light, sketchy lines that you can go back and erase later. But while you're drawing, they're pretty essential so that you can place the windows in. So what I do first is make the big box, then tops and bottoms of the windows. And then, you see how I put in these vertical lines. These, luckily, in Italy, this is not always the case, unfortunately, which will make your life harder, but these line up vertically. So if I draw in these vertical lines in my drawing, then it's like all you have to do is place the window in there, right? You've pretty much already placed it by drawing a horizontal and then vertical line. Now, like in this building here on the left, these windows are all pretty similar, right? But you see here, they actually have some interesting variations, right? Some shutters are closed, some are open. These have, you know, maybe some reflections, things like that. Now, we don't need to get into detail. As soon as any detail is the very last thing you do. Now, what you first want to look for is variation. Shutters open, shutters closed. Sometimes you have one shutter closed, one open, right? And just sort of, you know, you can also draw another vertical line for the shutters and put those in. Then the last step in putting in the windows is just a little bit of detail or depth, right? Usually it's a shadow to make the window seem real or three-dimensional, or not just a flat box on a page. So I'm going to show this photo without the lines on it. So, for example, even though the sun is sort of half out and half in, it's like probably sort of behind a cloud, or is going behind a cloud in this picture. You see how it's dark here at the top? There's a shadow, and that's because the window is recessed into the building, right? It's not just on the surface. So one thing to look for is like this L shape, or, you know, sometimes some of these have the thing in between, or here's the L shape that's really dark and this is lighter. So you want to spend a little bit of time. Now, I literally mean like a little bit of time, not a lot, showing at the very end, once you've got all your lines lined up and you've sort of put your window in, you know, you want to make some variation and then a little bit of detail, like some shadows or, you know, like a crossbar, something that will give it dimension and suggested detail, but not so much that you will be there for days or hours completing the windows. Now, you can suggest the shadow right here, which is under the sill, you know, shadows here, or even just a few lines to suggest the lines of the shutters. Anything that sort of makes, you know, a window sort of individual or a little, brings it to life a little bit. Now, this is really funny how, I mean, you rarely find this. All of these are exactly the same. Personally, I probably would vary them just because it starts to look like a flat pattern if they're all the same. So we're going to pick, you know, a section of part of this photograph and draw the building with the windows in it. But we're going to do it timed so that you literally cannot spend, you know, too much time making every detail and just have to put it in as best you can, like all the information as quickly as possible. Okay, so before we start, do you have any questions? Anything you're unsure of?
So do you mean
Is it better to draw big or small?
Well, that's really up to you. I would probably use like a half sheet of paper. So here's this is just a regular sheet of, you know, printer paper. I would probably half sheet is good because you don't want to, yeah, I think probably not too big. And another thing is draw in the line where the building meets the ground, so it's not floating in space. So the whole outer shape of the building, you know, which means the line where it meets the ground, and then, you know, dropping your vertical and horizontal lines to give you the placement and shapes of the windows. And then the last thing is really just adding a few details, maybe a little bit of shading to show depth or individual character to some of the windows. Does that answer your question? Okay, Donna, what were you going to say or ask?
You just answered the question speaking to another artist, so thank you.
Okay, great. Good. Okay, any other questions? Okay, let's just try it, right? Everything is like, let's try it and see what happens. So I'm going to share this image with you again on my screen, and I'll zoom in. How about, okay, I'll zoom in like this. So you can pick either, these left side windows, which, they're all sort of in shadow, or, some portion of this building here. So first, look for the big shape. Make sure you put in like the building sitting on the ground. And then the placement of where the windows go. So how about we'll start with 10 minutes and see if you need more time from there. Okay. Okay, so let's start.
Okay, just a few more seconds, like 30 more seconds. Okay, so that's 10 minutes. Do people need more time, or are you ready to have a look from here? Okay. Okay, so how did it go? What happened? Did it work?
We
Did
have
it
a new
not
respect
work?
for, we have a new respect for architecture.
Okay, yeah, so what was your experience of drawing in windows? Okay,
It
I'll
wasn't easy.
share my. Okay, what did you find difficult specifically?
Well, even with the lines, I didn't really line up my windows very well and get the proportions right. I mean, I just realized there's a long way to go before the building is correct in the way it's proportioned at all. And then, you know, kind of, anyway, it was interesting. It makes me want to work on it.
Right. So this is a sort of very abbreviated version, right? Because really the initial proportion of the building is pretty important. It's like, because then the windows fall into place, or, you know, the lines of the windows, right? They're sort of like little, you know, stripes of rectangles inside the bigger rectangle. They fall into place a lot easier if your, you know, proportions are pretty close from the beginning of the overall shape. But this can say, yeah, okay, Donna says it's hard to ignore the skyline between buildings and to do the windows. Right, so actually the sky between the buildings can be a really great gauge, right, for looking at that as a shape, for you to understand, right, that both the perspective of the buildings and also, you know, how close they are, how big they are. It's a really great shape to use when drawing buildings, the sky in between them. Okay, does any, somebody says the building still looks flat. Okay, so what do you mean by that? Like, it would have to know a little bit more.
Hi, this is
Okay,
Jan.
so we'll wait for Jen to respond.
Okay.
Hi.
Oh,
Oh,
hi.
great. Yeah, so tell me a little bit more.
It just continues to look like just a bunch of rectangles that it doesn't, I don't really see like any depth of the windows, or, you know, I'm not getting that, I don't know, the dimension.
Yeah, what can create depth are things like, let's see, noticing the recessed part of the window, like normally there's a shadow being cast on top, or it's darker on top, or this dark L shape, something that gives you the sense of that it's not, because windows do not sit flat on the outside of a building, right? They're recessed slightly in, some more than others. So just looking for small things like, I guess just in this drawing, you can see, you know, where it's, and it would even be darker up here. right? Or I can show you, the first thing is getting the proportions and the placement and the perspective. And then to make it look like they have depth, like how do we know that these aren't just sitting flat on the building? So that's something you can always ask yourself too, like how do I know that these aren't flat on the building? Or what's the difference between, you know, what I'm looking at here and my drawing? So you can look for things like right there's this shadow here, or even just small things like a shadow cast by the windowsill, or the shadow cast from the shutter here. But mostly it's showing variation in the window. Like it will probably be darker at the top and on one side, and then lighter as you go. So make sure not to fill it, even if it looks like it's all black, like here. Photographs flatten things out. If you look at something like this, see how it's darker, it's subtle, but you can exaggerate it to make it more pronounced. Something like it's darker here and then lighter here. Just doing small things like that can really help add a sense of three-dimensionality to the windows. But don't spend hours, right? We're talking about like a couple of marks, like dark at the top and then lighter at the bottom. Okay, does anybody else want to share or comment or ask a question?
I'll share.
Okay, great.
I gotta make it
Thanks,
over.
Jarrell.
I gotta see because I'm on Q. Hold on. I'm like on a Q. Oh, I can see from here.
Yeah, great. Excellent. So that looks great. So did you feel like these don't look flat? Do you think so? Or how did you like drawing this? What do you think?
I loved it. I had a blast. It's just like, oh my God, this is so complicated. There's like all this stuff going on. It was really fun. Really, really fun. But it's like, oh my God, there's so much going on.
Yeah, right there. I know windows can be totally overwhelming. So any way you can find to simplify, I think, yeah, will also keep your interest in the drawing. Right? So you don't want to quit halfway through. That's also important. That's cool. Thank you for sharing. Does anyone else want to share or comment?
The drawing that Joanne just showed us really helped think about focusing in on just one part of it all. It was good to see.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, really.
Pulling way back and trying to do all the buildings was I should have just focused on a very, like just a few windows or something over a doorway or something like that.
I agree.
Okay, great. Yes. Yeah, when you have more time, right? We don't have a lot of time. You can spend more time, but it's also probably nice to start in smaller bites. I can show you what I did. I did that building that was on the side, and I didn't draw buildings around it, so it does look like it's floating in space. But I left the line so you can see how I drew the, the verticals and horizontals to sort of line them up. And sometimes they're not lined up, or sometimes the proportions are off, right? So I'm not doing a photograph, I'm just making a drawing. So I want my drawing to be believable as a drawing that exists on its own. Okay. Cool. Anybody else want to share or say anything or ask a question?
Yeah, I can.
Let me show you.
Great.
I had a good time for sure. I just wanted another 2 hours.
Yeah, but you actually got them all in, right?
Yeah, he did really well.
You pretty much placed, and look how much you got done in 10 minutes.
Like in half an hour, you would have the whole thing done. Yeah, so what was your approach that you were able to get so much done in 10 minutes?
I drew the crude light outline of all the buildings first, and then I decided to focus on a certain part, you know, and then fill in more detail and kind of pay attention to it. So, like that.
Really, your drawing came up really nice. Actually, there's that one window where part of it is really dark and then you left the rest light. Gave it a nice sense of depth. Okay, cool. Anyone else?